Hey everyone, before we get started, I just want to bring up my Discord. If you want to chat with me or my friends and fans, come join the server. There's a link in the description. Also, please remember to like this video and leave a comment because it really helps me out. Alright, on with the video. Boss fights are usually the most important parts of whatever game they're in, and when boss fights are good, they can instantly become highlights for those who fight them. However, there's another side to this coin, when boss fights are bad. Sometimes boss fights are the worst part of a game they're in, and people absolutely dread fighting them for one reason or another. And now, I'm going to talk about the 15 bosses I dislike the most. Same rules as always, only one boss per franchise, and I'm not including final bosses on this one. That could be its own list. Well, time to rip this band-aid off. Let's roll! Mario bosses usually run the gambit of being passable. Nothing super flashy, and they don't need to be, and sometimes they can really stand out on their own. Paper Mario The Origami King certainly did have standout bosses, each of them challenging you in a completely different way, and most of them were really fun. But the key word in that sentence was most, because the tape really isn't that fun. After you finish exploring the Great Sea in search of the purple streamer, you come to the top of this tower and get jumped by this mob boss roll of tape. The battle starts like any other boss in the game. The tape is in the middle, and you have to rotate and slide the circles to line up for an attack. However, he won't just sit there and let you. After the first phase is done, he'll start taping panels together. This either causes multiple circles to rotate at once when you only want to rotate one, or makes it totally impossible to slide panels. This gets annoying incredibly fast, as oftentimes you won't have an ideal route to attack him, and you'll be forced to either make a suboptimal attack, use the Fire of Elemental to burn up all the tape, or just heal because trying to do anything else is impossible. The fight is not hard at all, but it gets really annoying really quickly. When I did the rematch and I was timed, it took me about 15 minutes. For reference, that's about 3 times longer than other bosses can take in the worst case. This just isn't a fun fight, but it's more annoying than it is challenging, which is why it's at the bottom of this list. Still, I just want to take this tape far away from me. Fire Emblem games are just one huge boss rush when you really think about it. You have to find the most ideal way to maneuver to the head unit in question, and the whole process is more about getting to the boss than the boss itself most of the time. Of course, as any veteran of the series can vouch, sometimes the process isn't exactly a fun one. I could have easily gone with a Fog of War chapter for this spot, however, I have a certain degree of distaste for chapter 23 of Conquest, Possessed. While invading Hoshido, the Norian army comes up to the Great Wall of Susanoo, and Takumi proclaims they won't get any further, leading to a confrontation. The first problem with this map is immediately apparent. There is a huge chasm down the middle. Theoretically, you could have your grounded units paired with flyers to fly across, except A, that would take a while, and B, they thought of that. There are multiple ballistas stationed around the map, and arrows are especially good at shooting down flyers, so your best choice is to take the bridge and just eat the barrage of arrows from the multiple ballistas. Once you get into the wall, you then have to deal with quite the onslaught as you slowly funnel units in and hope nobody drops before finally taking down Takumi himself. What really sucks about this whole chapter is that at pretty much every point, you're going to be peppered with damage you can't do much about, forcing you to either take it slow and heal often, or rush in and hope for the best. My first time playing Conquest, I was stuck on this chapter for well over an hour and a half because it genuinely felt stacked against me. And when I finally won, it was more of a sigh of relief than anything satisfying. Some might argue there are worse maps in this series, but this right here is the one I hate the most. Astral Chain is one of my favorite action games currently on the Switch. It's got all the adrenaline and energy I love from a Platinum Games product while still being able to stand on its own with its own identity. And one great thing about the game is the legions you get to control. But of course, you have to fight them first. The Sword Legion is a fairly simple fight that helps to give you a nice warm-up. The Arrow Legion is trickier, as it's good at keeping its distance, but it's fun all the same. The Arm Legion is not fun. Okay, on the surface, this is actually a really cool fight. The Arm Legion is meant to be the bruiser type of attacker, so it's fairly slow but packs a serious load. This will make for a great fight, except there's one huge flaw. All over the battlefield, there's collections of goofs that slow your movement. Now this goop has been a thing for most of the level, but most of the time it's more of an inconvenience rather than a threat, since you can just sick your Legion on enemies to deal with them. You can do the same thing here, but this thing obviously won't go down in a couple of hits. As a result, there are a lot of times where you're going to take a ton of damage through no real error of your own. Not helping the fact is that the camera in Astral Chain can be quite problematic at times. As opposed to the other Legion fights in the game, this one just felt needlessly frustrating, as when I tried to dodge attacks, I'd often get slowed by goop and mauled anyway. At least you get to control this thing after you win. I was a wimp before the Armed Legion, now I'm a jerk and everyone loves me. Cuphead is one of my favorite indie games. It has a great art style, controls beautifully, and above all else, it's just incredibly fun. Most of the bosses you end up fighting are just super creative and a great time. Bosses like Kagri Carnation, Beppy the Clown, and especially the Phantom Express are just excellent. Alas, not every boss in this roster could be a knockout. I was originally all set to talk about Grim Matchstick, but during my LP of the game, I found out it's actually not as bad as I remember. Which is good, because now I get to rag on Kale's robot! In the third area, you come across this junkyard, and within it is this gigantic robot looking to smash you to pieces. This boss takes place in the plane, and the issues become apparent quite quickly. In the first phase, you have to attack the robot's head, chest, and belly, while all three attack you with something. The head attacks with lasers, the chest shoots drones with electricity they have to parry, and the belly launches small ships. At first, it doesn't seem so bad, but when you destroy any of the parts, instead of, being destroyed, they instead start using new attacks. Destroy the head, and it'll start launching nuts and bolts at you. Take out the chest, and the robot starts using its arms to either attack from the side of the screen, or use a magnet to impair your movement. And the belly starts shooting bombs that chase you and have an enormous blast radius if shot at. The key is to take out all three parts and then destroy the heart, but doing that is a lot easier said than done because at this point you're being completely bombarded. After that, it's on to the second phase that's honestly a joke, surprisingly. The head just zooms back and forth, occasionally launching bombs. Just keep your wits about you, and this phase is quick and relatively painless. But then you have the final phase, and dear God, they pull no punches. At this point, Kale has the head hold out a diamond as it launches projectiles all over the place, making dodging hard and attacking even harder. And to make matters worse, there are electric walls that can pop up and make dodging even more of a pain. This isn't a boss fight you win by memorizing a pattern and nailing the execution. No, this right here is a complete test of endurance. There'll be many points where you're just blindsided by something while trying to attack. And unlike most of the other bosses in the game, there's barely a sense of satisfaction afterwards, just a sigh of relief that the nightmare is finally over. This boss is a complete headache, plain and simple. Octopath Traveler is one of my favorite RPGs to come out in recent years. It has an ingenious structure to it, and the battles are just so much fun. This really comes to head during the boss fights, where they challenge you to use the battle system to the best of your abilities to claim victory. Of course, in a game like this, there's always at least one stinker, and for me, that's easily the boss of Cyrus' third chapter, Yvonne. Cyrus' story centers around his search for an ancient and potentially dangerous tome, and that eventually leads him and the party to Stoneguard. After trying and failing to bait Cyrus into a trap, Yvonne kidnaps one of Cyrus' students, prompting the professor to take action and chase Yvonne down. Yvonne then uses the blood crystal to drastically increase his power, fully intending to kill Cyrus, beginning the fight. The battle begins with Yvonne having two assistants by his side, who are capable of using some powerful wind magic, while Yvonne focuses mainly on physical attacks. And one of those physical attacks is quite the nasty one, Intimidate. This attack is not only powerful, but it's also capable of inflicting silence to the target, sealing all of their skills. Between the assistant's propensity for party attacks and Yvonne's Intimidate, it does not take long for this fight to get annoying. But this gets taken to a whole new level halfway through the fight. When his HP is down to half or lower, he not only permanently ups his critical hit chance, but also gains two new devastating attacks. Pulverize, which drains all the BP of the target, and Shatter Soul, which completely depletes the target's SP. At this point, it's all a matter of whether or not you have enough healing supplies to keep up with the powerful attacks that can silence or zero out SP from crucial allies, and that's before you remember that he also has an attack that hits everyone and his crit rate is higher. The fight legit feels less like a test of wits and more of a test of luck, praying that your healer doesn't get hit by Intimidate or Silence, hoping you can hit his elemental weakness enough to stun him, and just keeping your fingers crossed that your item supply doesn't run out before the fight ends. Other bosses in the game were brutal, but you can at least plan for them in some capacity. Here though, just a whole lot of luck that you don't get screwed over. For all my issues with Metroid Prime 2, I still consider it a really good game. Sure, some of the design choices are just irksome, but what it nails beautifully. However, the boss roster is pretty hit or miss. You have some absolute great ones like Dark Samus, the Grapple Guardian, and especially Quadraxis. Then you have bosses like the Boost Guardian. When you're going through the Dark Tour respawn, you encounter an ing that has your boost ball, so naturally, you hunt it down. And then you corner it in this arena and the fight starts. The first phase simply has it moving around in its ing form and it's pretty manageable, but when it goes into the second phase, that's where things immediately start to become painful. The thing about each of the Guardians is that they use your abilities against you. In this case, the Boost Guardian zooms around the battlefield completely impervious to damage. Depending on your luck with its bouncing, you could get off scot-free, but more than likely, you'll just get utterly pounded. Not helping this matter is that there are no light areas in the arena at all, so if you haven't been picking up a decent number of energy tanks, you are pretty screwed. Occasionally, it'll turn into this puddle form, and when it does, that's your cue to use bombs for big damage. After enough hits are dealt, you take down this menace and reclaim your boost ball. This fight is pretty much a test of how good your luck is against the random rebounds, and it's not fun. The fact that one of the directors of Retro couldn't beat this boss without debug mode says way more than I ever could. Refighting bosses can be a difficult thing to sell. Sometimes it works well, like in the case of the Mega Man or Kirby series, but most of the time it's seen as a complete chore, and easily one of the most infamous examples is the Imprisoned from Skyward Sword. After finishing the third dungeon and returning to the sealed temple with the goddess harp in tow, the seal at the bottom of the pit breaks and this abomination is released. The fight is completely fine here. You just strike at the toes or alternatively drop onto its head to get to the ceiling spike embedded in its head. Do that 3 times and it gets sealed away again. If that were that, then it would have been okay. But no, it's not over yet. After finishing the 6th dungeon, the thing breaks out again, except this time it has arms! Also, whenever it walks now, it releases shockwaves, which only serves to make the fight more annoying. Fortunately, Gruz is here this time to assist by launching huge bombs right at it. But okay, you repeat the same process as last time and seal it away again. But it seems the seal might be faulty because this thing breaks out for a 3rd time not too long after the 2nd. And the fight is basically a rehash of the 2nd encounter, except this time it can fly. But that doesn't add much because a single bomb hit knocks it down for an easy hit. But then Gruz can't get to his bomb, so instead he aims Link right at the behemoth to deal the finishing blow. Just please land that shot, otherwise I'll have to start all over again. The fact that I have to fight this thing 3 times is already bad enough, but the second fight, and especially the third, feel like utter padding, and the fight barely changing doesn't help matters at all. Just stay down, you dumb beast, and stop wasting my time! Madworld is an incredibly fun game, and definitely a standout in the Wii library. With its art style, combat, humor, and sheer satisfaction of it all, it's just a fantastic game to play. However, even super fun games like this have their moments of just being dreadful. When you get to the third area of the game, you're greeted with a level that's honestly not great. The zombies everywhere are massive pains because you have to really make sure they're dead, otherwise they come back. The structure doesn't exactly lend itself to fun exploration like other levels, and the mid-boss being able to one-shot you is just plain stupid. At least the Bloodbath challenge is a fun one. However, the level caps off with easily the most infamous boss fight in the game, the Shamans. Most of the other fights in the game are one-on-one encounters, but this guy brings his whole pack. But instead of fighting you like the wolf he's supposed to be, he's a complete scaredy cat and runs away from most of the fights. You have to chase him down if you want any chance of dealing damage. Meanwhile, his lackeys are constantly dogpiling you. The only time you can reliably damage him is during the power struggle, but that's only if you can get the motion sensors in the Wii Remote to work for you, because I've noticed they can be a tad finicky in this fight specifically. And when he's not running away, he's making a wheel out of his pack to ram you and can't be hurt while doing so. And that's the whole fight right there. He barely attacks you outside the wheel, so it's not only frustrating, but it's also boring. The finisher isn't even all that satisfying either, really cementing this fight as the worst fight in the game. This huffs, puffs, and absolutely blows. I love the last story to death, you all know this. The story, characters, world, lore, and combat are all sublime. However, the boss lineup is certainly not one of its strongest aspects. There are fights that are absolute marvels, such as the Queen of the Abyss, Jirah, and especially General Astar. However, you also have bosses like the Tentacore, Kraken, and the Shades. There are 2 Shade fights in the game, and they're basically the same both times. One of them is optional, fought in Chapter 22. Before you can leave the tavern with the rescued hostage, you get jumped by this massive darkness and have to get rid of it. It's weak to fire magic, so either Yurik has to scorch it or use one of the torches around the battlefield. Its only attack is pathetically easy to block, and after you hit it enough, it vanishes, takes control of an ally, and summons tavern fires to just waste your time. Rinse and repeat until its health finally reaches 0. Then there's a fight that's mandatory later on. And yeah, all that's different is that you replace fire magic with Marania's nature magic and tavern fires with skeletons. Everything else is the same, and it's just as dull. This fight is just beyond boring and mindless, and it isn't even satisfying by the end of it. It's just over. I just hope these things stay in the darkness for good. Okay, I really enjoy Persona 4, but a big issue I have with it is that the boss lineup isn't exactly great. A lot of them are just damage sponges, and the battles aren't terribly dynamic. You just wail on them until their health reaches 0. However, I'd gladly take any of those subpar bosses over having to fight Shadow Mitsuo. Okay, let me lay this out for you. You just completed the 3rd dungeon, yet despite your success, a murder happens anyway. You go to investigate and chase down this random guy named Mitsuo Kubo, and he ends up in this 8-bit looking area. So after an incredibly annoying dungeon, with admittedly nice aesthetics and music, you confront this whiner and his shadow attacks, and the fight begins. Hishawa begins the fight by surrounding himself with bits to form a shell. The attacks at this point aren't too bad, just some non-elemental attacks, but once you take out the shell, that's when things really start going downhill. Shadow Mitsuo is capable of attacking twice each turn, is resistant to physical and almighty damage, and completely immune to light and dark damage, and is fully capable of using every type of damage except light and dark to attack with. It does not matter what your team composition is, there is always a chance he'll attack with a weakness and get to attack again and the pain can continue. But that's not the worst part. When he's not attacking with the elements or a powerful Megadola spell, he can easily inflict fear. And to make matters even worse, one of his attacks will insta-kill any ally who currently has the fear status. In other words, the battle could straight up end through just getting unlucky. And the rotten cherry on top of this miserable cake is that Mitsuo will regenerate his shell after enough time has passed, forcing you to deal with it again. This fight right here is just completely unfair. There are so many factors stacked against you and you can barely plan accordingly. Depending on your luck, you can either win on your first try, but more than likely you'll get schooled through no error of your own. The absolute worst way to see a game over. One of the reasons I adore the Kingdom Hearts series so much is the plethora of excellent boss fights. They're adrenaline-packed, frantic, sometimes super challenging, but above all else, most of them are fun. However, this series is no stranger to subpar boss fights that can be frustrating, boring, or sometimes both. And my pick for this list is the complete antithesis of what I expect from this series. In other words, the Choke Lobster can screw right off! After going through the ocean in Sora's version of Prankster's Paradise, this gigantic Dream Eater comes out of nowhere and freezes Monstro, so as a result, you're forced to fight it. During the fight, this thing will attack by launching bombs, swiping his claws, and slamming down. Thing is, with how enormous the battlefield is, it's not difficult at all to dodge its attacks, especially considering this thing is a huge and slow target. Occasionally, it'll start glowing and gain some laser attacks, but those are beyond easy to dodge as well. And when the fight is almost over, you free Monstro with the reality shift and slowly float towards the boss, dodging its projectiles before a one-button finish. Like I said, this fight right here is the total opposite of the kind of fights I enjoy in this series. It's boring, barely anything happens, and it takes an eternity and a half to kill! Even if you do take some pod shots here and there, you can just retreat far enough away and heal, totally safe from anything it might try! Legit, you can just spam flow motion attacks for a good majority of the fight and win, and that's just sad! And I would like to point out that the other Klopster you fight with Riku was a perfectly decent fight, so what the heck happened here? Who gave this boss the cold shoulder during development? Optional bosses are a bit of a tricky subject to evaluate. Without the constraints of being mandatory, developers can go absolutely nuts with these kind of battles, making for memorable experiences that are totally worth the trouble of hunting them down. Unless we're talking about the Devourer in Bug Fables. This fight is just plain awful. The Devourer is one of the optional bounty fights in the game, residing in the Golden Path. When you stumble across this supposed dead end, this ginormous pitcher plant pops in out of nowhere and the fight begins. As per usual, you can attack before it does, but that hardly matters because once it starts attacking, it quickly becomes painful. It attacks with poison bubbles, poison breath, and occasionally summoning fly traps to its aid. If it just ended there, this fight would be wholly manageable, but no. This diabolical plant has a super nasty trick up its sleeve. Its last attack is to slam her to the ground, launching the party airborne, and potentially swallowing an ally whole. There is absolutely no way to prevent it, it's completely luck-based. And if an ally gets eaten, they're effectively out of commission for potentially 3 full turns while its monster saps their health to heal. The best strategy is to just stitch any notion of playing the long game and just wailing on it with absolutely everything you've got as soon as the battle begins. Hope that you can beat it fast. Pray that its first attack doesn't involve an ally getting eaten because you're basically screwed at that point. This fight was a complete and total nightmare for me when I played the game for the first time, and I nearly gave up. But eventually, I did manage to persevere. And what's crazy is that none of the other bounty fights were this nightmarish. This is the only one that made me want to pull my hair out. Fitting in a way, because insects have absolutely no business fighting a carnivorous plant. I love Xenoblade Chronicles to death. It's one of my absolute favorite RPGs. Yet despite my glowing praise for the game, the overall boss lineup is pretty weak. A lot of them barely feel like little more than just stronger regular enemies without anything to make them stick out beyond their design or story relevance. That's not to say none of them can stand out. The fight with Eggyll is one of my favorite boss fights ever. However, oftentimes when bosses in this game stand out, it's for the wrong reasons. And easily the most infamous example is without a doubt, Lorithia. Lorithia is one of the major antagonists of the game, and it's clear from the get-go she has her own agenda beyond serving the High-Entia. She tries to have Melia killed during her trial, turns almost all the High-Entia into Telethia, and tries to wipe out any resistance to Zanza. Near the end of the game after Zanza has been released, the party travels inside Bionis in order to get to Prison Island. Once at the heart of the Titan, Lorithia is there waiting for him, and after a really disturbing moment with Melia's brother, she merges with his body and this migraine of a fight begins. She starts the fight by summoning a group of Nebulas, which not only adds more enemies to deal with, but also bolsters her defenses, so you have to take them on first. Big problem with that though, Lorithia herself. She attacks with lasers, ramming, and a powerful attack that can inflict confusion. And if these attacks don't kill, they'll likely knock your allies into the ether pools around the battlefield that sap away their health. And even if you can inflict stat debuffs on her, she can just remove them at any time. This fight is ultimately a gigantic war of attrition with the odds stacked ridiculously against you. Even if you're good with ether attack management, it doesn't matter. You're going to suffer heavy damage either from attacking the nebulas or Lorithia utterly walloping you. For many a Xenoblade player, this fight right here was the biggest obstacle to completion because it genuinely feels unfair. So you can probably imagine when I did my 100% run in the Definitive Edition and was way over leveled for this fight, it was beyond satisfying to just utterly destroy her. I like a hard boss fight, but only if it's hard for the right reasons. This is only hard for being cheap. You need to pay for your insolence, you witch! Something I feel that doesn't get the amount of attention it should is how important early game bosses are. The first few bosses are incredibly important for the game they're in because they're meant to ease you in. Sure, they can be challenging in their own right, but their intent in the grand scheme of things is to make sure you're ready for the road ahead. Having said that, the absolute worst place to have a difficulty spike is in this early period, when the player is still getting acclimated to everything. That's a roundabout way of me asking, why is Garuso the third boss? In Tales of Vesperia, the party takes M-Head Hill in hopes of finding Yuri's friend Flynn. And before they're home free, this behemoth jumps them with the full intent to tear them to shreds. The battle begins, and this wolf has its own pack. That's a warning sign already, because while you or your allies are trying to attack Garuso, these surprisingly aggressive pops are hounding you and making sure Rita and Estelle don't have a chance to do their thing. And that's the least of your concerns. Garuso has a roar attack that does heavy damage even when blocked and can also poison allies. And at this point in the game, money isn't exactly plentiful, so allies dying from poison is absolutely a concern. But there's also a matter of the flowers around the battlefield. When they're struck, even by accident, they'll release pollen that stuns anything. In theory, you can use it to stun the enemies, but in reality, it's just one more obstacle for you to have to deal with. And that's before Garuso enters Overlimit and proceeds to just massacre everyone. A boss of this caliber shouldn't be this early on in the game because a player will likely get frustrated and just give up, and that's truly a shame. Vesperia is one of the best Tales games, but a roadblock like this can keep a lot of people from experiencing everything that it has to offer. Just stay down, you munt, and let me see past this! The Mega Man series in my eyes is one that's heavily defined by its boss fights. No matter the kind of game or iteration of the Blue Bomber there is, the boss fights are usually the most important part. Some are easy, some are challenging, some are totally forgettable, some are utterly nightmarish, but plenty of them are incredibly memorable. Truly, this series is a hallmark of excellent boss design. There's just one little blemish that kinda goes against everything. Who the heck designed the fight with Gate? Okay, let me lay out some context. Gate is Alia's old friend, and stumbled upon a piece of machinery which ended up infecting him with the Maverick virus. He then goes power mad and tries to carry out Sigma's will by bringing every Reploid to their knees. Naturally, this doesn't sit well with X, and after chasing Gate down, Gate decides to eliminate the root of his problem outright. Gate covers himself with a special armor that makes him completely invulnerable to any attack X or Zero might try. That's the first issue right there. Even when bosses are immune to attacks, they usually have some kind of weak spot you can strike at, but Gate has nothing. Instead, you have to attack the orbs he shoots out and hope that the projectiles they break into hit him. And you best act fast because those orbs aren't just targets, they all do something. Red ones slow you down, orange ones fire energy bullets, blue ones pull you towards them, green ones chase you, and the purple ones create nightmare viruses to pester you. And that's not even all Gate can do. He can just straight up ram you or destroy platforms you're standing on. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention that you're fighting over a bottomless pit and it's incredibly easy to just fall in and die? Because yeah, that's a thing. This fight just completely spits in the design philosophy every other fight in the entire franchise has. You don't win by figuring out his pattern, learning the fight, and calculating a plan to beat him. No, you win when Gate says you win. There are so many ways to die here that are completely not your fault, and Gate just does not care. He researched and developed the perfect way to beat the Maverick Hunters, and in doing so, made by and far the absolute worst boss fight I've ever experienced. I'm Arrow Dragon, and even though X6 is a guilty pleasure of mine, I cannot fathom any sort of defense for this absolutely disgusting display of a boss fight. Well, this was a topic I was certainly passionate about, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Again, I'm really sorry this ended up taking so long, but life kept getting in the way. As for what's coming next, it's a very special topic. I'm going to talk about the games that I find my most nostalgic. Well, until next time, this is Arrow Dragon, signing off.